Welcome back to Manufacturing Unscripted. My guest today is Jonathon Hard from H2L Solutions. Jonathon shared how he's safeguarding critical systems for government and industry, as well as discussing what it takes in the manufacturing environment to maintain compliance with government standards. We hope you enjoy.
This podcast is sponsored by Promus Incorporated, the leading provider of fully electric servo presses for manufacturing. Promus provides global support for pressing and motion control applications in multiple industries. With precise positioning and in-process force monitoring, your company will begin to see ROI on day one. Call 810-229-9334 or email sales@promusinc.com to speak with an expert engineer about your application today.
Welcome back to Manufacturing Unscripted. I'm your host, Peter Parsons, and today I'm talking with Jonathon Hard from H2L Solutions. It's good to have you on the show, Jonathon.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and thanks for having me, Peter.
Yeah. If you'd like to start off and just kind of share with our listeners a little bit about yourself, I always like to ask people kind of what their journey has been to kind of get to the point where they are today. And aside from that, if you could also kind of maybe introduce us to H2L Solutions and what you guys are all about.
Yeah, sure. The H2L Solutions introduction part is probably easier than going about the journey of how I got there. But to answer your first question, grew up in Southern Tennessee, went to the military, got my degree at Marion Military Institute, and then for UAH, got deployed in the 07 and 08 over there in Iraq, came back. And this is kind of where everything kind of shifted. Before I deployed, I delivered packages for FedEx, right? So no cybersecurity background. I did have a business degree in management from UAH. Every officer has to have some sort of degree. But from a technology perspective and a leadership / entrepreneur perspective, nothing, right? I mean, no past experience in those departments. But got back here in Huntsville, Alabama, and got plugged into the defense industrial base sector. I think the first person that hired me was SAIC. So they hired me, brought me on there. I spent around 5 years before I left that great organization, and they were a really good organization. They taught me the foundations of, at that time, information assurance, which is now cybersecurity. And it's an important topic, and I'm sure we'll cover some of that later. But they taught me the foundations of why we needed to do cybersecurity. And then I went and worked for Jacobs IT, IBM. And it was at IBM that myself and the two other founders of the company decided to start something of our own. And the reason we did that, at the time, the contracting market space was very volatile. It changed all the time. It was very hard for an employee to spend 20 years and retire at a company if you weren't like at a Lockheed Martin or a Raytheon. The incumbent to the contract wouldn't win and you would badge flip. You'd still have your job. It would just be with a different company. And so, growing up the way I did, I had always seen and heard people saying, well, we're retiring at GM, retiring at the post office. And these people spent their entire lives at these companies. And that was not going to happen with the trajectory that we were on. And so talked to my two buddies that I deployed with, and we decided to start, H2L Solutions, which stands for Hard, Hartsfield, and Lazovsky, the three last names of the founders of the company. And we picked H2L Solutions, and we went down that road. We had no past performance. We had no work lined up. We had no government contracts. We didn't know any government customers. We really all we had was our experiences in the military, our experiences with those those contractors that we had worked for, and a drive to not fail. And that's really, drive to not fail, and just the audacity to continue to persevere through every single obstacle that hit our way. And we got a lot. But now shifting into the H2L Solutions, we've grown over the past 11 years. So at the very beginning, it was three individuals. We're around 40 employees now. Top secret facility clearance. We've got we do work with the FBI, the Missile Defense Agency, Army Corps of Engineers, the Ground Vehicle System Center up in Detroit, or our Detroit Arsenal. We've got work with NAVFAC, AFCAC, and then we've done penetration testing for the commercial industry. I mean, we have done so much in 11 years. From a past performance perspective, underneath the cybersecurity umbrella, because H2L Solutions is a cybersecurity firm through and through. That's how we started 11 years ago. We have every type of past performance except for maybe, and I couldn't tell you if we did, like sanctioned CIA taking down other adversaries' past performance, right? So, but tactical weapon systems. We've done embedded cybersecurity systems for tactical weapon systems, for industrial control systems, for IT enterprise systems, for SCADA systems. We have work out in Guam right now. We like to solve complex cyber problems in a positive way, right? And so, from a I guess a standard capability spill, we enjoy the complicated problems that others are frustrated to fix. It just brings us energy. And that's the type of ecosystem we try to put out into the whole company and its employees. We are a team, and if one person in the team has an issue, you don't have to try to solve it by yourself. Come back and we'll help. Let's solve these problems, because if we don't, we're going to fail, and we're definitely going to fail on the war front side, because our adversaries are leaning very forward in the foxhole on trying to defeat all of our platforms that we have, that we are currently using against them, right? And so they take our research and development dollars, which we have a lot of, and we create new things. Like I'm sure you've had some amazing people on your podcast that are inventing new developments that can keep us ahead, outpace our adversaries. Well, our adversaries take their R&D money and use it to hack into those companies to get that information that they've created, but then they'll focus on how to defeat that. And so it's like we have to, and there's something we take very passionately at H2L Solutions, we have to ensure that our platforms, that our IT systems, that our nation takes cybersecurity seriously and takes it to where we're just not bleeding out information to our adversaries all the time. So,
yeah. Along those same lines, I guess one of the first questions that comes to mind for me is, when it comes to cybersecurity, is there kind of a common theme that a lot of people get wrong, or maybe a way of thinking about it that people aren't really doing correctly?
So, and it's a great question. And yes, so what we have seen in the past is a lot of, I'm just going to, I don't want to say a specific trade, but we'll just say, for a good example, we'll say engineers. Their job is to engineer something in order for it to work, right? And work the way that it should work based on the requirements of the design, and maybe even, supersede those requirements, right? Well, the issue or the concern comes when cybersecurity comes into play and says, hey, time out, we need to add these certain limitations to that piece of equipment or that IT enterprise system or widget that you're building, which then breaks their design and or makes the functionality of their piece of equipment not work like they want to. And so you'll see a lot of frustrated engineers, frustrated PMs. What we have seen to mitigate that concern is baking cybersecurity into the design and into the specifications and into the design before manufacturing even starts or prototypes are built. That eliminates that frustration and that constant fight between engineers and then cybersecurity. And then also it really helps the engineers understand that the products that they're building or the solutions that they're providing now have another risk factor that's been taken off the table.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty common thing for a lot of people to see cybersecurity as kind of just another box on their checklist. So they've got their machine, they develop their solution, and then once they get to that point on the list, then it's like, okay, well now let's figure out the cybersecurity. Kind of like you're saying, it's not being part of that original design philosophy or part of the original innovation. It's kind of something that's pushed towards the end, and then all of a sudden everyone has to scramble to adapt and make sure everything's compliant there. What would you say is a good way to really make sure that you're prioritizing that security within the design itself?
Right. So, and I'll just use a good example with some of our projects on the ICS side of the house, the industrial control system side of the house, the manufacturers. We'll just take an HVAC system manufacturer, for instance. So, we will come in with that architectural engineering firm and look at the design specifications. The military, we'll just say overarching military, won't name any organizations, has gotten a lot better with putting cybersecurity requirements in the design of those of the statement of work. And so what the military is saying, hey, Mr. or Mrs. A&E firm, when you're doing your design for the construction company, for the general contractor, you need to put in cybersecurity specs or specifications in it so that when the general contractor gets the design and everything, it talks about what they're supposed to do, right, at the beginning, right? So, for instance, from an HVAC system perspective, in that cybersecurity design specifications, we should state, or whoever is doing the cybersecurity stuff should state, get a hardened HVAC system. Get an HVAC system that has been, the security technical implementation guides or the STIGs have been applied to it as much as you can. Maybe a baseline cybersecurity hardening to the HVAC, and buy one of those. Right. What we saw a couple of years ago is like there were very few HVAC manufacturers that were willing to do that to their HVAC systems because it's going to be more costly, and then they're not going to be competitive with their competitors, right? Their HVAC system is going to cost more because they spent more time making it more cyberproof, right? And so what we've seen now is, since those are being baked in to the specifications, we are seeing some manufacturers either get their own internal cybersecurity team or employees to solve some of those issues from a hardware perspective, or address it holistically with their new designs of their units, specifically set aside or being sold to, we'll just say, military installations. So getting the end customers, the purchasers, the buyers to understand, really the requirement holders to understand that cybersecurity needs to be baked in to the design and not just baked on or added on. That's really where the cost savings is, and where the schedules aren't getting pushed to the right because, dang, we forgot to add the cybersecurity requirement, which we have seen. I can't tell you how many times a general contractor would come to us, and this is because of the latency, and it is how it is. And I see with some of the new FAR being rewritten, and our acquisition lifecycle in the United States is very slow, and we're seeing how that is being sped up. And I'm really interested and hopeful to see that in the next couple of years being executed. But how it has been done and how it is currently kind of being done is a company would do the design specifications, and at the time they were doing the design specifications, there's no cybersecurity requirement in there. So that design firm or that A&E firm didn't tell the general contractor to do anything with cyber because it's not a requirement. Well, then the general contractor bids on the construction piece, the build piece, gets the design to build it, and then the owner of that installation, will just say, Army Corps of Engineers says, "Hey, whoa, time out. We need you to add security to this. The cyber now needs to be applied." So we've been called in, and those projects are sometimes interesting to execute.
I imagine it's kind of difficult to sometimes come in and almost be kind of propped up as the villain of,
That's
all right,
right.
you've got this all set up, and now I'm gonna tear it apart and tell you where you went wrong. And
I was going to be saying that the hated person in the room, and yeah, it's necessary now. I mean, before we started H2L Solutions, the common, I guess the common theme for our industrial base is just a big old rubber stamp that said blank owned. And when I say blank, I don't name adversaries anymore, but owned, right? And it was the whole United States blank owned, and it was because of all the cybersecurity attacks and breaches that had been by this certain country. And all of our research and design work, all of our innovations and inventions were being sucked to that adversarial country.
yeah, and with that idea in mind, I guess, what kind of pushback do you usually see? I mean, I know a lot of times it's kind of the process of, this is what needs to be done in order to get everything compliant, in order to get everything, properly wrapped up in a bow and then shipped out. But I imagine there's probably a bit of pushback that you sometimes receive for people who might not be willing.
Yeah. So what we have seen on certain projects is the lack of patience. And when I say lack of patience, the project engineer, they're done. Everything's done, right? Everything's been built. It's passed its functional testing, its field testing, and the only thing left is to get that stamp of cybersecurity, hardened, right? Or to get the authority to operate, or to get the sign, the ATO or the AO to sign off on it. And that might be taking a little bit, but what we sometimes get from our customers is, hey, we need to speed this up. We need to get that. We're done. We're ready to wrap this up and tie a ribbon on it. We try to always make sure that schedule aligns very closely with the execution of everything with in this case, the construction. So, if the construction's going up, we should have already done the site survey. We should have already talked to the HVAC manufacturer. You should have already talked to the fire protection control system manufacturer, the lighting system, the elevator system. We should have already talked to all those OEMs and know what software is being used, what hardware is being used. And then once they start installing those, we'll go out there and then harden them well before the commissioning of the building takes place. And therefore, we're not going to be the bad guy holding anything up, And so we've baked that in, and it's really, like you said earlier, it's getting in there, initial project kickoff, and because in the initial project kickoff, no one really cares about cybersecurity. We want it. Where are we going to be digging? Where the backhoe's coming? Where are we installing the computer equipment? Where are we going to test the missile system? Cyber is really not on the forefront of anybody's mind, but as the cybersecurity company, you gotta be jumping up and down in the corner of the room saying, hey, my turn. Hey, I'm not gonna take a whole bunch of time. I just need to know who the OEM manufacturers are, or what software, who is the cyber representative for the government. That's all I need to know, right? And then y'all go continue to execute, and I'll go talk to that guy or gal over there and get all the information I know. And it's about laying expectations out right then and there with whoever the government cyber representatives that will be the authorizing official for whatever it is that you're trying to harden, because making sure that you understand what he or she is expecting from you from a cybersecurity products perspective, that sets you up for success every single time.
Yeah. And I imagine especially cybersecurity, it can be one of the most consequential things if, neglected and left until the very end.
Oh, absolutely. It's destroyed. We were on one project. I won't say whose, but it was a microgrid. And we were on contract to go in there, harden the microgrid systems and everything, and the metering room, all of that. Well, we never even 2 years, and then they just canned the project, and it had nothing to do. Well, it did have something to do with cyber. It wasn't on us. It was the the contracting authority and then the system owner couldn't decide on how to categorize the system from a cyber perspective. So with risk management framework on the government side, DoD side, they have the system owner owns the network. Technically, they are supposed to categorize the system. If the system is categorized, 1, 2, or 3, high, low, low, moderate, whatever, it then tells from our execution perspective, how many controls do we have to implement in order to pass the mustard from getting the system hardened, right? If it's high, I might have 1,800 cybersecurity controls that we have to, deal with. If it's low, it might be 600. So there is a level of effort based on the categorization of the system. They couldn't, the system owner was like, well, we're paying you, contracting authority, to tell us what we should categorize it as. We don't know what we should categorize it as. And then the contracting authority was like, we're making sure that everything stays on schedule. We'll do the PM stuff, but we don't own the system. And just that, oh man, it was horrible. We even said, this is how we would recommend you categorize the system, Mr. or Mrs. Government. But and it needed to be done. They just canned the whole thing because they couldn't. And that is a good representation of how, I guess cyber can and has killed projects in the past. But
yeah, I mean, definitely, everyone wants every project to succeed, but a lot of times, the process of getting there and, what the idea of success looks like, you can have these disagreements and eventually lead to things like projects being canceled just because you're not able to find a common agreement.
And another thing that I have found in my 11 years of navigating the amazing waters of DoD contracting is sometimes these cybersecurity representatives for the government might not be very confident in their decision making because, yes, they have been trained on how to do contracting, and they have certain cybersecurity, certifications. They understand compliance, but they might be a little weak, or they might not have someone that they can go to and rely on from a technical cyber perspective to really understand. Like, we'll just take the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, for example, that Oshkosh built for the replacement for the Humvee. There was like 22 embedded systems that were connected in that thing, right? And so when we were working on that, CAN bus, I'm talking about, it was extremely complicated. And we had a lot of, I guess, proving why we were executing and implementing certain things, proving to like you would prove in a court of law because of that, how I could see it, lack of maybe confidence of understanding real technical cyber versus maybe just the compliance piece. And we've seen that with really, that's with every industry. You even go from a pen testing perspective, right? Is cyber, underneath the umbrella, you've got tons of different avenues you can say you're a cybersecurity, person under, right? It could be GRC, governance, compliance, and regulations, where you're a policy person, but you're looking at cybersecurity policies and you're writing on how your company implements them versus, a penetration tester, right? Who is actually in there coding with Java, Python, all this stuff, and learning, how to bypass the firewalls and all that. Now, those are two different streams of, extremes of cybersecurity in different ways that people want to execute. And what I tend to see is that a lot of the government side really does really well on the compliance side. And they sometimes struggle on the actual technical side because industry pays so much better, right? So industry, we saw this firsthand. We were doing a red team. We were the only contractor on the Ground Vehicle Systems Center Red Team Lab up in Detroit Arsenal. I think we had 2 or 3 documentation writers. They would take the red team penetration testers results, because no one really technical likes writing, right? They would take all of their results and then make it presentable to the customer so that they could understand the vulnerabilities of the certain platforms that were being assessed. But the interesting piece was we had two red team, pen testers, very technical, very, very technical. I think we were paying them, and this was back in, I want to say 2017, 2018 maybe. So up there, we were paying them around $140 a piece, $140,000. Not too bad. I mean, that's pretty good. Man, as soon as you got what you one got is a OSCP certification, which is like the god of God's cert, or at least it was back then, right? The mecca of pen testing certs, because it's not just a written test. You have to prove that you can actually hack into, I think it was a Linux machine and then a Windows-based machine, but you had to. And if you didn't prove it and you didn't do it, you don't get the cert. And then you also at the end had to type up an executive report, because you might be a technical god at hacking, but if you can't communicate what you've done, then you still fail, right? At least from a funding perspective. But man, as soon as he got that certification, boom, he got a job from, I think it was Uber, working at home, like $250K in his underwear, right? Remotely. He's like, done. Hey, I'm done. Peace out. Yeah, so the technical side is in such high demand that, I constantly see these geniuses, once they get, certain cert or have proven themselves enough to industry, they get sucked up just like that. And not so much on the GRC side of the cybersecurity employment and the career spectrum, though.
Yeah. One thing I'm kind of curious of, if maybe you could elaborate on, but I know like government contract work, DoD, everything like that, a lot of people are kind of trying to get in compliance and trying to, be able to work with those industries and be able to get any kind of contract work they can. Yeah. I'm curious if within the struggles that these companies have to kind of bring themselves up to code and to get these compliances, what would you say are kind of the differences between maybe like a mom and pop machine shop that's got 5 employees versus maybe a much more well-established, 100,000 person company? I imagine each of them has their own kind of unique struggles. But I guess could you maybe go over some of those differences
Sure.
and struggles that people have?
I would think the biggest thing, the big difference that I would see in that, Peter, is money and overhead. I mean, so and this is where the barriers of entry to DoD contracting come into full play. And there didn't used to be as many. And I'll touch on the cyber one that is here now. But the big barriers to DoD contracting used to be facilities clearance, right? Well, clearance. You have to get your own individual clearance. But then even if you have your own individual clearance, your facility still needs the clearance in order for you to be a for your company to be a subcontractor and for you to prime anything. So that's a huge industry barrier right there, because we did it. Hell, it took us 3.5 years to get our facilities clearance. We all had our own clearances, but no other company would help us because they didn't want another competitor in the space. We had to we had to, and I'll give them a shout out because they're a great company in Colorado Springs, Apogee Engineering. We invited them down to the Space and Missile Defense Symposium here in Huntsville. I think that was, that might have been 9 years ago. Showed them, introduced them to 15, 20 different companies, got meetings with them. The CEO was so thankful. He said, Jonathon, what can I do for you? Like you spent 4 of your days with my team down there, introducing me, trying to help us grow in Huntsville. I was like, sir, can you get us a facility clearance? He's like, too easy. And I'm just like, and so, things like that. But it took us 3.5 years, Peter, to get that. And so we were just doing we were doing recruiting gigs. We were doing side hustles for, pen testing for commercial work. We were doing work for a subcon. We were doing like 3rd-tier sub work, sub of a sub of a sub with white labeling our name to the sub, right? So like the sub was subbing to us, but we couldn't say we're H2L Solutions because we didn't have. So we were, So it was just you're trying to make rent any way you can and the struggle is real. So that's one big barrier to entry. The other one, having something in with a manufacturer, there's a lot of upfront costs, right? The machine work, the machine shop, what is it that the government needs, right? They're building stuff all the time. A good way is finding a machine shop owner who is ready to get out, who's had his or her fill. That's always a great career move, right? Because usually they have a facility clearance already, hopefully. And you just go in there and buy it, get your clearance, go in there and buy it, and boom, and you're start. But if you don't, my cousin started a machine shop, and I went in business with him and helped him out. But huge upfront cost. Finally, you got to have a building, right? And then you got to start buying the machines, and then you have to pay for all of that. So you have to go get the work. And in that perspective, he lucked out. He's in, Huntsville, and there's a lot of work here, but he would go to the Northrops. He would go to the Boeings. He would go and be like, I can do that faster. I can do that for 10% cheaper. I can do, and so it's the hustle. As a small business entrepreneur, you got to hustle. The other newer barrier to entry, right? Now, there'd always been cybersecurity concerns, and there'd always been best practices, and there's always been ISO certifications and certain things, the SANS top 20 that industry should be doing to their IT enterprise networks, whether they're a machine shop and or just a regular services company. If you're a machine shop, you can mitigate some of those things by having a standalone environment with your machine, right? And we'll talk about that a little later, but the newest, I guess, barrier to entry, and it is what it is. It's here. It started in 2015 with I can't remember the executive order off the top of my head, but Barack Obama signed an executive order stating that creating the CUI program, the Controlled and Classified Information Program, and basically the goal of this was to stop the bleeding of the defense industrial base, to create a cybersecurity baseline that everyone needs to follow, right? The first cybersecurity requirements that were implemented with that DFARS, it was the DFARS 7012 clause, but were 51 cybersecurity requirements that were actually pulled from the NIST 853, the National Institute of Standards Technology 853, which is how the 853 is how you protect federal information systems, federal. Not contractor owned, but federal. But they didn't have anything for contractors. So they pulled those 51 most important cybersecurity controls that they thought out of that and put it in there, saying you're gonna implement these, right? Nothing happened for years, right? And it was, it was talked about, industry saw it coming. There really wasn't any teeth to it. Well, then the NIST 800-171 was written. Right, the 110 controls that need to be implemented for a non-federal information system. Boom. The FAR was updated. The DFARS was updated. 3 requirements. One was the adequate security requirement. That's the NIST 800-171. There was a response, a hacking requirement, like an incident response requirement. You had 72 hours to report to the government if you've been hacked. And then the third was a flow down requirement. If you had CUI, or if you had that in your contracts and you were a prime, you needed to flow that down to your subs. It got a little more traction. It started to get put into people's contracts, but there's still, to leadership up at Beltway, there was not enough teeth in that requirement, right? If someone could interpret the 110 security controls differently from a different company owner. So these two companies, yes, they might have the same NIST 800-171 document, and they're reading the security controls that have to be implemented on his or her network, but they don't understand. They don't understand what they're reading. One company does it one way, another company does it the different way. There was no standardization. And so that really didn't solve the problem of everyone getting a baseline implemented correctly, right? And so we'll fast forward to, when was Trump first elected? Was that 2018?
16, I believe.
Was 6. Okay. So fast forward, I think it was around 2016, 2017. An individual comes in to the Pentagon and is an appointed official, and creates the CMMC program. the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program. I think I said it right, and basically what this program was meant to do was to create a third-party ecosystem, a third-party body to create standards, to create a certification program that, like an ISO 9001 and ISO 27001, the certain ISO certifications for manufacturers, right? A third party will come out, and they know what right looks like. We'll see. Some of those ISO things are, but anyways, they know what right looks like, and they'll come out and they'll make sure that you're doing it right. Well, it just got written into law, I think it was, November of last year, right? And so CMMC level 1, CMMC level 2. Now level 2 is self-certified, and then third-party certified by C3PAO, right? That's been blessed off by the governing body, which is CyberAB, which I think ISACA just took them up as their, I guess, founding non-for-profit that's governing them now. I know ISACA does CMMI, and so it would make sense for ISACA, I guess, to suck up CMMC. But the CyberAB is falling under ISACA from a parent purview perspective. But then, and then CMMC level 3, which I think, if I'm correct right now, it only apply the DIBCAC, the Defense Industrial Base, actual government certifications would certify companies for if they had to have a CMMC level 3 certification. That is a huge barrier to entry for the mom and pops machine shops. And the reason is because now they actually have to prove that they are implementing this cybersecurity requirement. Usually a machine shop is not a prime contractor on a contract. Usually it's a subcontractor building something for a Lockheed, a Raytheon, a Boeing, right? A manufacturer. They're building something, and those big subs, it's cheaper those big primes, it's cheaper for them to sub out to mom and pops machine shops. You get a better deal. It's not as expensive. They make more money that way. Well, by law, those companies, the schematics, the actual entity, we'll just say it's a missile system. Well, that's CUI. That's got CUI all in it. And so Lockheed, not to pick on them, great company, they now have implemented CMMC level 2, and they got a third party. But now they're flowing that all down to their subcontractors, and they're saying to their supply chain, "Hey, we're not telling you, but we're telling you that if you want to do work with us, you got to be CMMC level 2 certified." Is basically what they're saying. And so to all the mom and pops in the smaller machine shop, they're going to have to figure out how to do it. Well, how they would do it is that they're seeing their supply chain. They're like, "Oh man, okay, we got to do something about this. We want to keep our contracts." And we'll just say they don't know anything about it. We'll just say they just been operating in the dark. They're just now being hit with this. They're like, "Oh man, dang, okay." They give it to their FSO, or they give it to their contracts person. Figure this out. The CEO of well, they come back in a couple of days and they're like, "Sir, ma'am, please sit down. This is a huge endeavor. We have to have multi-factor authentication, FIPS compliance stuff. We've got to have, FedRAMP. We have to change the entire IT infrastructure of our company." And they're like, "Oh, well, how much is that going to cost?" Well, I mean, maybe $100,000, depending on if you're going to go GCC high or if they're the Google version and a Google Gov version. And so we've seen a lot of manufacturers, and there was one in particular, I can't remember their name, but they were like, "Screw it, we're out. We're not doing," and their line of work for the DoD was so small that they could do that. And they're like, "We're out. We're not messing with this." Now, is that the right answer? Does it tell me that they don't care about having a certain cybersecurity baseline to protect their stuff? Maybe. But at the same time, it's business when it comes to the commercial side, and you can't run a business that's not making money, or that, a business that's you're going to lose a lot in a year, especially if you're beholden to shareholders. So what we've seen, I think it's going to get better. It is a very cost upfront investment. There are a lot of companies out there that understand the small business plea and the medium-sized business plea. And I think as time goes by, Peter, we're going to see more cost-effective solutions hit the street. On average, we'll say of the machine shop or the manufacturing entity is ready. They have been tracking this. They've been doing things. They've made the initial investment. They went ahead and went to GCC High for their IT enterprise stuff. They went ahead and left the machine shots on enclave, right? Because it's standalone. So they're out of scope technically. I've seen some and if that's the case, if there's no COI over there, there's no way to get it, then you're out of scope, right? Or if you have a good, prove me wrong. But if you're getting emails, CUI documents, or whatever, the IT enterprise system will say is in scope. Okay, they want to be certified now, right? Because their big primes are saying that they need to be certified. So they go to the Cyber AB marketplace, and they look for C3PAOs. Those are the companies that have paid their $15,000 a year to, I think it's a year, but anyways, paid their initial cost of $15,000 to the Cyber AB, and have been assessed by the government's DIBCAC team, the government team, based on the NIST 171, but based on the entire assessment criteria, right? Because if you're going to be a C3PAO, you're basically doing it on behalf of the government, right? And so the government comes in and assesses you, and when you pass, you're now a C3PAO, and you can assess other companies. Well, I mean, when we are a C3PAO, we got it last year. And I'm going to be very careful what I say. At a high level, I had a lot of other C3PAO firms tell me that it should be a certain price tag for that certification, right? And between me and you and the fence post over here, I thought that was really, really high, like just an enormous amount of money. Maybe not for Lockheed to pay, or maybe not for, a mid-size services company that has baked all their overhead into their services, but for a manufacturing company or a small mom and pops services company, an exorbitant amount of money to pay. And so I will say this, in the low six figures, right? A lot of money. A machine, a manufacturing machine. Maybe not a super expensive one, but a manufacturing machine, a cost for a company to come out and do an assessment for maybe a little under a week, and then to write a report to whether you're implementing those controls or not. And so what we have seen, which is a really good indicator that there is a price correction out there, is that price is dropping. We're not, I'm not going to say where we are, but we're not, that. We're not that. You just couldn't do that. And I've reined in my rhetoric a lot, but it is here to stay. It is in law, and unless someone cans it, it's here. But in my opinion, because we did a lot of cost analysis on the actual level of effort it would take to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that company that we're evaluating has actually done what they said they're supposed to do from an implementation perspective for that cybersecurity requirement, does not take that much money or time, right? When the DIBCAC assessed us, when the government assessed us, it was about a week. Now, they had, I think, 4 or 5 people on that team, right? But I don't think they were working, every 4 or 5 were working 40 hours a week. So, I mean, even we even did the math. Even if you had a 4-person team that worked on that assessment all 40 hours, 4 times 40, right? And then we just say they got paid, that's still way under that six-figure price tag for that assessment, which means to me, somebody's making a ton of profit. People will argue that the certification fees, that the assessors, right, the lead CCA fee, the CCA fee, the CCP fee, an RPO fee, all that go to the Cyber AB, to play in the ecosystem, costs a lot of money, and that's why the fees are so high. I think the fee for CCP is $5,000, and I think it's a yearly fee. So you pay $5,000, you get the cert, and then every year you have to pay the certification, which is kind of interesting. I don't know of any other cert where you do that. Like a CISSP, you'd pay the money, and then you use the continuing education that you get to maintain the certification. You wouldn't have to pay the upfront cost again unless you let the certification expire. But if my memory is correct, that's not the case with these certifications. You have to pay that year, that money every year. So, like I said, I'm going to tread water here very lightly and just say it is, in my opinion, after looking at numbers very thoroughly, that there is a lot of profit that might be being made off the backs of small and medium-sized businesses. Yeah. Over to you, Peter.
Yeah, no, definitely a lot to consider with that. But definitely kind of what you touched on where, money, a lot of times it can be this barrier to entry for a lot of smaller companies, which, there's the pros and cons to everything usually. Where, you might have smaller companies that might not have the familiarity. They might not have, the technical know-how to really fill in with all this compliance. But at the same time, you really want to make sure that you're fostering competition, that you're making sure to invest in, smaller, mid-sized manufacturers. Because really, you want to avoid, the pure monopolization of any industry.
That's right.
But definitely with the way the certifications are, the way everything costs, money, a lot of times it's the primary decision maker. It's what's deciding, whether or not this is an industry they want to pursue or kind of focus in on. I wonder if maybe you could talk for a little bit about the costs for a business that aren't necessarily money. With compliance and making sure that you're working in this industry, following these standards, what are the kind of other costs you might have, whether in time or training or just kind of, someone who might be a worker on the floor, maybe not in the executive suite making financial decisions, what's kind of their impact?
So it depends on how much that entity wants to outsource risk. So if the entity wants to absorb the risk and do it themselves, then they would need to invest in someone who understood cybersecurity and also how to execute IT functions, right? They would also need to understand that person, and it depends on how large the entity is, right? They might have a small IT infrastructure where they could, that would only be that person's half-time job to maintain the compliancy of the systems and ensure that everything's updated correctly for that next time the certification came around. And then the other time, maybe he or she could be the FSO, or he or she could be a direct bill person. But they're still going to be paying something for that maintaining of that compliancy. The other thing that we have seen some small businesses do is try to outsource it entirely to a managed service provider or a managed security service provider, right? I'm always of the mindset that you want to outsource as much risk, at least that you can, afford, if it makes sense, because then that's someone else's job that you can look at them and say, hey, you need to fix this. That's what you're getting paid to do, right? And from a compliancy maintenance perspective, some of these MSSPs and MSPs are getting really good, and they understand the requirements. They themselves have made the investment to ensure that their clients meet those requirements because their infrastructure has been upgraded based upon those regulations. And so you might be a host of whatever MSP or MSSP that you're using, but since you're in their enclave or their environment, you're meeting those controls. And a lot of those MSPs and MSSPs have all that documented and written, and they already know if you go with them, here's all the controls you're going to meet. And we'll stand up to any third-party assessor, any C3PO, and we'll go toe-to-toe with them and argue why they're implemented, And that's always good for a small business to have an advocate in their corner that can speak the same language as these auditors and these certifiers and understands what they're asking and looking for. Because in an assessment, you never want to be like, whenever someone's asking you, have you done something? You always want someone to be able to go to bat for you. I can't recall what the third thing I was going to say, man, but those are the two main things that popped in my head. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And definitely as people, just gain more information, I think information itself a lot of times can just be a huge hurdle for people where, maybe there's not a clear, there's not a, guide to the exact way to follow compliance.
Well, and this is another thing, Peter, that really, and I still I'm a green suiter. I'm still in the military, right? If the red star cluster goes up and we're going to war with an adversary, I'm going. And so I see the ecosystem that we're participating in. I understand the ecosystem that we're participating in. And sometimes I get very frustrated when that ecosystem there's a new requirement and people are trying to take advantage of it. And when I say take advantage of it, they're trying to profitize and make as much money off of it as they can by, we'll just say, fear mongering. You've got it. And what we saw, or what I saw before it was actually written into law last year in November, were the previous 5 years, fear mongering. And so now that it's here, what we're seeing is price gouging, more fear mongering, and people trying to exploit these small and medium-sized companies by capitalizing on the statement, you can't do work with the primes or the government if you don't do this. Call me, and that disgusts me. And so our message that we're trying to say is we'll have an open conversation with you. Don't freak out. We got you. And you won't be paying that crazy amount of money. And even, back in the day before this was here, we would do DFAR 7012 assessments for some companies for free because they were so small, because they were cool companies and they made an actual product. And it got me excited that they're actually making, I almost said a cuss word, stuff for the warfighter, And so, but they at that time couldn't afford it. And so we would go in and help, but I guess it's the greed. The greed is what ticks me off. And some of these people, they've never, picked up a weapon. They've never voluntarily, said, I'm going to go join the military. I'm going to go fight for our country. But yet they're profitizing off of an ecosystem that was just created by a requirement that some people thought would be a good requirement, and then create a whole ecosystem off of that requirement that is now hurting small businesses. And it doesn't have to hurt small businesses because we can do it better. We can do it more efficiently. When I say we, cybersecurity firms as a whole should step up to the plate. And I'm not saying that they lose money. I'm not saying that they don't make profit. I understand how a business, you need to make profit, but there's a difference between making absurd amounts of profit and making an honest profit. 10% profit is really good. That's a really good profit. 50 to 60% profit, everyone has their own morals and values and their own way of how they run things. But, when push comes to shove, people will see that, and people do see that. And then those people, they don't get work. They don't re-get work. Right. So anyways, man, I got to jump on a soapbox on that and I start getting upset. And I told myself I was not going to say anything negative about this barrier to entry that we're now currently talking about, because some other podcasts, man.
Oh, oof. Yeah. I mean, definitely. I think we kind of mentioned it before, though. A lot of times there's, the cost barrier to entry, and a lot of times that's kind of at the forefront of what people are thinking of. What am I going to do to profit? How can I make money? But I mean, like you mentioned too, sometimes that's the only thing in people's minds. And especially if you're working with, things as important as the DoD, that can't be your only decision maker. If the money dries up, are you still having that commitment to this industry? And are you still, willing to put in work for something that is incredibly valuable?
Man, you said it. You hit the nail on the head right there, man. Right? Yeah, because, I have kids. I don't know if you have kids. I would like for them to still enjoy the freedoms that I enjoyed, as in my youth and not be speaking a different language. You know what I mean? So it's very, okay. Or what, you got to become a huge multimillionaire, and then where you got to leave the country? What country is better than the United States right now? Yes, it still has its issues, but if you go travel to 10 different companies, 10 different countries, and come back and let me know. I know I've been to like 39 different countries. Every time I'm like, thank God for America. I'm like, praise Jesus. It has its faults, but man, it's still the best country in the world. But another thing I was thinking about, I'm not trying to tell small DoD contracting companies or manufacturers not to do this work, because we need you. We need you. There are ways to do it effectively and implement the cybersecurity controls effectively. I think there's really good companies out there that can help and do it cost effective. And I will say this, Peter, if anyone's interested in those, I usually keep a list. I don't have it with me, but I have a list of people that we have vetted that I trust, because profits are not number one on their priority, right? Doing a good job, being honest. Yeah, they're going to make some profit, but it's not going to be 50 or 60%, right? And they always try to make sure that they make their clients happy. And that's how, in my opinion, that's how you run an effective business. And so if anyone is struggling, or, if anyone wants more information on some of those companies and their managed security service providers and their managed service providers, and some of them are even some of our competitors, right? But if we're not a good fit for you, then go over there, get it done by one of them, because they're a good, honest broker. Now, some of our competitors are crooks, but I'm just saying, there's everyone needs cybersecurity. It's of huge importance. And so my competitor, who's actually an ethical person, can help you if we can.
Yeah. And I think maybe kind of as we maybe wrap up this conversation here, I'm curious if maybe kind of in a conclusion, if there's one thing you could kind of share with companies that are looking for compliance, looking to enter into this industry, or even just kind of looking to stay on top of their compliances and regulations, what information kind of would you share to them as kind of like an elevator pitch?
We'll say if they're already in the industry and they're already doing work, and they have done the cybersecurity requirements implementation, make sure you stay on top of it. The Cyber AB is the regulatory arm. Join their mailing distro. Keep on track of any updates, because it is a new requirement that just got it's going to change, right? They already came out and said that printable CUI is now not applicable, right? So, hey, whoa, that's like construction companies. Hey, you telling me these printed blueprints, I don't have to protect it? Sweet. You know what I mean? So they're already hearing the pushback of some industries about how certain types of CUI is going to be protected. If you're looking to get into this market space, then I would do a lot of research. Make sure you have a great CPA firm. Make sure you have a great lawyer. Make sure you have a GovCon lawyer, a lawyer that understands government contracts. Because when this regulation, and just like any other regulation from now until when those GovCon lawyers are tracking these, it's their job to track these. And so they will tell you what you have to do by law. And a good one, well, if a new regulation is coming, they'll let you know about it, right? So get a good GovCon, and then get a great banker, right? And understand that when I say we, the country, the nation needs you and needs your innovativeness, needs your small business energy, needs your tenacity to accomplish our mission. From a warfighter perspective, I would rather have my product made by a mom and pops or an ESOP, an employee-owned company. No offense to any of the large, huge build, but I know that they have skin in the game. I know that they care about what they're making. And the facility clearance, I mean, that's I still haven't figured out I remember real quick, I went and talked to Frank Kendall up at the Pentagon, and I was like, "Sir, we don't have a facilities clearance," and they just did not understand that you don't get one. It was the SBA office up there; they just didn't understand it. Like, how do you not know when new companies start, they don't automatically get a facility clearance? The SBA, the Small Business Association, should do something about that. Maybe they have a pilot program for, maybe 100 machine shops a year. Come in and prove to us that we need you, and you know what? We'll give you a security clearance to help you out, right? To take that in lieu of all this money you're spending on cyber, we will give you a facility clearance if you come in to the DoD. There's got to be some, like you said, motivating factor to come into the industry. And it's usually those lucrative contracts that last, 3 to 5 years, right? That stable amount of income is usually what brings people into the sector. But once those barriers of entry make it so painful and reduce the money that they would be making, they're not going to come into the sector anymore.
Yeah. We're definitely fortunate, promoting small businesses and small manufacturing. It's one of those issues that, everyone's pretty much in agreement on is, it's really important to develop that and cultivate that, which, it eventually ends up in a stronger manufacturing industry for the country as a whole.
That's right. That's right.
So, Jonathon, definitely, I'd like to thank you for talking with me here today. Really appreciate it. A lot of very good insight and just information in general. I think I myself was not as familiar with, and hopefully our listeners as well were able to get a lot of information out of it. So thank you again for your continued service to the country, as well as what you're doing with H2L Solutions. And to all of our listeners out there, I'd like to thank you as well for tuning in week after week. Until next time, we'll see you then.
This podcast is brought to you by Promise Incorporated. Hosted by Peter Parsons, produced by Lauren Rawl, and mixed and edited by Ben Parsons. If you have any questions or would like to appear on the podcast, please reach out to podcast@promiseinc.com. Thanks for listening.